All right, we are going to get the next panel started. As I mentioned, we are going to be talking about how to prepare your platform for agentic commerce. I'm really thrilled to welcome to the stage an expert, someone who's really been leading the charge on this topic at scale. Ryan Pritchard is the SVP of Engineering and Agentic Commerce at PayPal. So everyone, please give a warm, warm welcome to Ryan. All right, well, Ryan, would love to just quickly hear a little bit about your background and what you do at PayPal to kick us off.
Sure. So I've been at PayPal for about 8 years, and I focus on a couple different areas. One is obviously agentic commerce. That's where I probably spend a majority of my time these days. But I also run engineering for small businesses as well as financial services. So the financial services area is effectively anything that covers, for both consumers and merchants, anything PayPal branded that we own and operate. Our credit cards, debit cards, lending for businesses, things like that.
Well, very good. It seems like the buzzword this year at every payments and tech conference has got to be agentic commerce.
Yes.
Before we get, though, into the strategy, I want to make sure that we all know what it is. Because I talk to a lot of people routinely, and everyone uses the word, but I actually think a lot of people don't really, truly know what it means. And even if they do, I'm not sure they could explain it. And so in very basic terms, Ryan, what is agentic commerce?
So agentic commerce is effectively when AI is used to find or buy things for you. That's a very oversimplified version. I think maybe a more nuanced description, though, is when AI is performing any or all parts of a commerce workflow. There's obviously basic things that people know about searching and discovering for products, adding items to carts, those constructs, making purchases, but there's also a bunch of things that happen after, post-purchase, that can be considered agentic commerce if AI is conducting any parts of that workflow.
And maybe for the audience, tell us a little bit about what are some of the different stages that you think about as we have the evolution of agentic commerce?
Yeah, so this is all playing out in front of us now. Probably a number of you have interacted with various parts of these stages, but I see these in front of us 3 stages right now. Stage 1 is what's called CUA, which it's the acronym, which is computer using agents. Effectively, this is when AI is interacting with all of the interfaces that have been built for humans over the last 30 plus years, also known as websites. So this was a big push last year from OpenAI. They had the operator model where you would go in and search for things and it would literally spin up a browser in front of you and interact with it like a person would interact with it. The good thing about that model is that it scales. Like there's tons of websites. It uses these websites that have already been built. That's the good thing. And the other sort of good thing is AI is actually pretty good at performing those jobs on the browser. It's not perfect. It's slow, though. And then probably most importantly, it's very expensive for AI to do that because effectively what it's doing in most cases is it's actually taking screenshots of it and analyzing what it needs to do next. And so really that's just the very start of that. That's stage 1.
Okay.
Stage 2 is where there's a lot of activity right now, and I think at the end of last year this really picked up, which is the layer underneath the human interface. These are all basically allows access for AI to connect to back-end systems. And so this allows AI to orchestrate a bunch of these workflows I mentioned before, searching for these products, but also creating carts, adding items to carts, even kicking off the payment process, all of this stuff. Now, this access is much, much better for AI because that's the language that AI talks, is whether it's, we'll talk about later on MCP, but machine to machines are what AI wants to do. That's sort of stage 2. And last year, a bunch of standards have come out. not quite at scale, and those are maturing, but that's sort of that stage 2. Lastly, stage 3 that a lot of people talk about, but it's not quite here yet, is really autonomous commerce. And so this is a really fun, thought-provoking stage where really the first 2 humans are in the loop. You're always there. You're kind of kicking things off. You're maybe interacting with the browser or interacting with an agent, but you're effectively there from beginning to end. With the autonomous, you may not be there, right? You basically are telling AI, hey, here's my intent. I don't want to be bothered with exactly how you do it. Go figure it out, literally beginning to end. And so there's a lot of implications or ramifications of that model. Very exciting, but that's sort of where we're progressing right now. And this is very, very early stages, really even for stage 2 and 3.
Yeah, so I think maybe to kind of restate it for the audience, we started in a world of almost screen scraping, right? Taking screenshots, using OCR, using other technologies to extract where on the page you are, and then filling it in a scripting type way. We've now started to move where there are defined protocols where data can be exchanged. I think of it almost like back in the day, Plaid did a lot of screen scraping to get bank information. Then all of a sudden there was APIs that the bank started to expose, and I think we're just starting to get there with some e-commerce platforms that are exposing this, certainly not all though yet.
Yeah, 100%. And in fact, while there's a number of these platforms that have these back-end systems available, but it's not unified, right? And so that's where the scaling issue starts to come in.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the early days of the internet where there just weren't standards yet.
Yeah.
There was a lot of competing standards. It took a long time for it to kind of settle down and get to a point where it was truly universal and standard. So I think we're still probably somewhere on that adoption curve.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
As you think about, Ryan, what we need to go from stage 2 to 3, where we try to move to more full autonomy, which I think a lot of people, when they think of agentic commerce, that may be what they have in mind.
Yeah.
What do we need? What are the building blocks that are missing still to get there?
Sure. So let's take a look at kind of where we are today. And I think most people, again, have probably interacted in this mode where there is substantial amount of AI that is influencing commerce decisions today. So call it discoverability. That is picking up, and there's some really interesting numbers behind that. So that's kind of where we are, sort of today. As we were talking about the agentic checkouts or stage 2 part of it, like I was just saying, it's really more adoption into these standards, which will follow in terms of like a standard protocol on how all these things work. But to get really to autonomous, I think there's 3 areas that need to be really locked in. And so the one is discoverability, like I said, making sure the systems are discoverable through the standard means. Number 2 is authorization and consent.
Okay.
And this is, again, in an autonomous world, this is a very important thing because you need to record. If you're not in the loop, you may not see everything happening. So how can I store exactly what the person wanted to do versus what actually happened, and all the consent that goes with that. And then really 3 is, even once you figure out those 2 steps, nothing's going to go perfect. Something is going to go wrong. And that's where liability really sort of comes into. And so that's a big thing where there's a lot of activity happening, but really none of the frameworks and structures account for agents. They're always assuming, like CFPB, Reg-E's, all these things, that person's actually in the loop.
Right. We'll get more into that later. I know PayPal has a lot of broad data points and viewpoints into the market. Are there any numbers that you're able to share with us in terms of adoption?
Yeah. So we'll start with some of the data from this past Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Again, it's only 5 days, right? But there was about $3 billion in AI-driven commerce that happened in that amount of time. For the platforms that have been around for even the previous year, that's like an 11x from the previous year. So last year was like a wow moment, I think, from that standpoint. The other thing is familiarity. As like I was mentioning, a lot of people here probably have already engaged with things like ChatGPT for discovery of products. Market or like US-wide, that's about 40% of Americans have actually done that in one way or another, where they're using AI to help make a commerce decision. 60% is actually across Gen Z and millennials. So you get a lot of, even in those cohorts, they're really huge. And so they're already beginning, they're starting that journey, right? If you look ahead, some of the reports I find interesting are not even that far out, a couple years out, 3.5 years out at this point. Deloitte is predicting about 25% of all e-commerce will be done agentically, which is about $1.7 trillion. So 3.5 years, that's like pretty bonkers. It's pretty surprising. So we also actually just did a survey with our own merchants actually around this as well. We released this today, in fact, and we did a couple thousand of our merchants. And it's very similar, where most of them do feel like agentic commerce is here in one way or another. And the interesting thing is the thing that they're most concerned about is trusting agentic commerce. And this goes a little bit to what we were talking about before. The interesting thing that I learned, though, from that survey was that the ones that don't trust it as much are the ones that are leaning in more, which I think makes sense. So they're really engaging in agentic commerce. They're researching it. They're partnering with some of the platforms to make their products go live, and actually even in that stage 2, really leaning in there. But they're also worried about liability. But what I think what they're betting on is, hey, if I lean into this, I may be able to influence it, number one, and two, on a relatively low scale, because again, humans are in the loop a lot right now. You can work out some of those kinks early on. Don't sit back and sort of wait.
Yeah. So to zoom out, on the scale of global or even just domestic commerce, $3 billion is still a tiny number, right? I mean, we're talking trillions of dollars annually that gets processed. Not even a rounding error yet. But I think what's most interesting, though,
for 5 days.
And that was over for 5 days. That wasn't even one day. I think what's most interesting, though, to peel out of that is the growth rate, right? And we're seeing huge growth. And so I think if we zoom out far enough, we're going to start to see up and to the right very, very quickly and exponentially. And that, I think, when we look at the Deloitte surveys and others, that's, I think, what they're glemming onto. And so we're I think, in a lot of ways, right on the cusp of it.
Yeah.
And so, let's kind of move forward. How should we be thinking about the scale of this disruption? I mean, in the future, think about a fitness studio, with scheduling. Think about other, consumer interactions, even beyond just e-commerce. Because I think e-commerce is one thing. You're going online, you're asking ChatGPT, what is the best cookware? What are the best linens? Those things for kind of broad discovery. But as we kind of think more about your day-to-day interactions, how do you think that that's going to manifest? And how should platforms be thinking about that more specifically?
I think the biggest thing is to focus on, this is really a mindset change, right? If you think about the evolution of commerce through human history, it's always between humans, right? And so when you think about, especially from a platform standpoint, if you're readying your platform for agentic commerce, you now have to know what agents want and algorithms want and how to optimize for this stuff. And so I think that's really the biggest mindset shift there, is to say, okay, it's really fundamentally a completely different audience from that standpoint. And when you start leaning into what is happening in the market, a lot of people will say, and I do believe that it's constant news. Like I'm constantly even updating my talking points for today because something new is coming in, right?
Yeah.
But what you start to see is that there is a little, like a stasis point where, like, you can't introduce any more protocols. Like something is going to start to kind of circle around. And even in some of the main ones right now, there's fundamentally 2 big winners right now, and we'll see how that sort of plays out. So while there's a lot of activity, if you can kind of hone in on the things that you need to some of the winners that are coming out and start to partake in there, I think it's really interesting. I think what we see right now is that the main focus for these, even in the protocols and the autonomous pieces, it's mostly retail, like goods based.
Okay.
And I think there's a huge opportunity for service based for sure. But that's where that focus is going on, that we see sort of right now. So.
Got it. I want to drill into 2 points there. The first is you mentioned there's two competing protocols.
Yeah.
Can you just share a little bit, at a very high level maybe, what are the two protocols and what are some of the differences between them?
Yeah, so let's talk about the different stacks of protocols happening in there, because it's not, you'll hear protocols a lot, they're not all necessarily solving the same thing. I think the most ubiquitous one protocol was rolled out last year by Anthropic. That was MCP, which is Model Context Protocol. And effectively, this is what's referred to a lot as like the USB of accessing LLMs, LLMs accessing your systems. And this is, in Maslow's hierarchy, it's one of the first things I would say you should know and focus on, because it gives really any LLM access to understand the context of what your company provides and also the tools that you can provide. So when we talk about that next layer underneath the human interface, that is like your key to it. In fact, if you take a look at what ChatGPT and OpenAI are doing with their protocol, they're leaning very heavily on MCP in their ecosystem as a way to actually bring customers to you to complete the purchase, right? So Maslow's hierarchy, MCP is sort of number one, and that's just, again, commerce, non-commerce related. It's just having LLM access and interact with what you're doing. Then you get into the commerce stuff, and the first one is like just general commerce workflows at a high level, and that's where the two most popular ones are ACP by OpenAI and UCP by Google. And again, mostly retail focused, mostly can do the same thing. Actually, to throw some more numbers at, when I said like a lot of the stuff isn't yet at scale, I think over the holiday, they had maybe 30 merchants that were actually live on it. So it's actually, again, it takes a while for merchants and everything to get on there and onboard. There's all this, there's changes that need to happen. But that's at the commerce level. Then you get into the authorization sort of protocols. And this is, at PayPal, we worked with Google on the AP2 spec. And this is basically how to move money around across different agents. And there's overlap in between them. Then there's other protocols that are doing other things as well. But those are primarily like the two most popular ones that are happening right now.
And so how should platforms and merchants think about that? Are we at a place where they actually need to implement both because there isn't one standard yet, and to kind of have broad coverage, you just really need both? Is it pick one or the other and hope it wins? How do you think we should be thinking about this?
So there are solutions out there, and PayPal happens to be one of them. I will plug it just right now, but this is something I actually do spend a lot of time on. We build what's called a store sync. And the idea is that you integrate once with us, and other people can do this as well, but just the concept I really am a big believer on, which is you integrate with things like, and I'll use retail as an example briefly, but like your product catalogs and your systems or your order management systems, and obviously, if you're using PayPal for payments, it's already there, right? But the same could apply for service-based things as well, as if you're a scheduler, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, you integrate there, and then we take care of all the other different protocols. Because, like I said, last year, while OpenAI made a huge announcement around ACP, there was very little onboarding. Some of these companies are learning commerce for the first time and how to build around it. Right. So we've done this for quite some time, and we can help facilitate that. And that's something that we're really spending a lot of time on, really just making sure what we call all of our merchants are agent ready, right? And there's a lot of other layers in there, but I would say, that's one way that you get a lot of leverage, and you connect. Now, this pattern is nothing new. We actually acquired a company in Israel last year to help facilitate this. This company was Symbio. They do this for marketplaces, right? You connect into your product catalog, you have access to all your commerce systems, and then it's distributing into different marketplaces, right? Again, the difference though is that now you have to distribute it for agents, which is fundamentally sort of different. So I think that's the way to go. And as these things mature and everything, like, you don't really have to worry about it. You know what I mean? You don't have to worry about necessarily onboarding to these other players. It's just sort of there. We just recently announced a partnership with Meta. Same thing, same exact thing. So, and they happen to be using one of the two standards.
Yeah, so it sounds like really there'll be an enablement layer, whether it's from PayPal or someone else, to kind of navigate at all the different layers of the stack, competing protocols, how they interact with each other.
Yeah.
Basically, leave it to the pros. Let an enabler really handle it, unless you're just at absolutely massive scale.
Yeah, that's the key thing, right? And the nice thing actually is, to that point, Joshua, like a lot of the interactions that we have with these companies, because we have direct relationships with the OpenAI, Google, and Meta. Their main focus has been large enterprises, right? Because they kind of, like, if you think about starting your marketplace, you want like big brand names, you want all this other stuff. The nice thing is the work that we're doing for them applies perfectly for smaller people, right? And I run engineering for SMB, right? Those are my those are the people I like to make happiest, right? Yeah. And so it's almost like the Tesla model back in the day. You build the $300,000 Roadster, but eventually you get down to the Model 3, and all of those people putting the investments and R&D into it get to take a sort of advantage of that, which I think is really great.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about discoverability. I vividly remember back in the day when Google Shopping first came to light. And at the time, I think many small merchants were super excited, because all of a sudden, their products could appear alongside the Best Buys of the world, or along the Costco's of the world, or whomever. There was kind of this awakening almost of access to smaller merchants. I'm hearing in a lot of ways now a lot of fear from small merchants in particular around discoverability, because now you're taking a Google Shopping aggregator model almost to the extreme, where an LLM can kind of see almost any product. And there's a lot of worry that, is it just going to be the cheapest product wins? And also a lot of the value adds that are added during the checkout process, you don't have access to. And a lot of the margin in retail oftentimes comes from those add-ons, upsells, things like that. And so how do you think about discoverability, both for SMBs, for larger retailers, but also around the checkout experience, and the fact that you're being disintermediated by LLMs at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would flip it around. I think this is a perfect leveling playing field opportunity for small businesses. I mean, if you're really honest with things like SEO and everything, like, I mean, small businesses have no chance compared to, like, they don't have the money to get in front of like the eyeballs for people right now. The interesting thing is when we think about, it's like gone are the days of SEO, and now it's AEO, right? It's all about agents. And this is a real thing now that we're seeing, right? Just a couple of numbers that I find really intriguing. Google right now, 48% of their searches flips over to the AI overview page, right? Guess what that does for click-through rates in the old search? I mean, it drops it by 60%, right? So you're like, okay, well now, like, these guys are paying a ton of money, and you're getting on page one. Like, you're not even seeing.
There is no page one anymore.
There is no page one,
it's
right?
A page
it's actually
zero.
Like down the fold a little bit, but you're right. Like, fundamentally, like that's sort of effectively gone, right? So you see that starting to evaporate. And what the opportunity then is to be like, okay, well, like now, and everyone, this is a big driver in when people are using LLMs in commerce, is that they are now very intent focused versus like product focused, meaning like, okay, this is what I'm trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. How can I actually, like, now what's the best thing for me? Yeah. And so what you start to see, to use the Google analogy, is that, of course, like, your marketplace spec, your files and everything, that's still standard. But what's happening right now is companies like Google and other people, like, actually that's not good enough. There's a lot of other attributes that we need to really distinguish between products, right? So again, like, this is in some way a little bit of a leveling playing field. If you can really organize your data really well and add a bunch of other data and attributes, keep everything real time or near real time, like inventory, what starts to happen is that agents wind up being good at deciphering those data points. Could be a differentiator, right? And the agents don't care if you're large or if you spend a ton of money on SEO, right? If you have your stuff together, and another big pattern that's happening is looking at your reviews, right? I mean, obviously, like, this stuff matters, like, and so they're really good at multivariate analysis. So they can look at you and who you are to say, are you sort of trustworthy? But if you have everything together, you can show up. There's no reason why your product won't show up, earlier in a search for like LLM, right? And then you grab the customer, and then you can sort of go from there. But like just going back to what this means from an AEO standpoint, tangibly, is having the things that people like your websites and everything be machine readable. What does this mean? Well, AI can, to your point, Joshua, like they can scrape your website, but it's still like error prone. It's not great. Sure. There are new standards and formats. They've been now around probably at least a year, if not longer, which seems like forever. But to help LLMs understand the structure of your website, right, yep. And understand in files called like Markdown files. So you can have other pieces of your website that are just tailored to that, and that really helps out. And like I said, on the MCP side, that gives you the gateway for any LLM to interact with your business as well.
Very good. Let's talk a little bit about beyond e-commerce. We have a lot of vertical SaaS attendees here who are more on the services business. They don't sell a product, they're really selling a service. How should they be thinking about agentic commerce?
I think in the same way, right? Like you want what you do very discoverable to LLMs, for sure. Now, I actually think vertical SaaS has even a bigger opportunity for disruption and to win against your competitors in this, because if you think about the vertical, there's more parts of the workflow in service-based pieces that happen on your websites than like an Amazon, like for retail, right? Like there's like 2 clicks and you're basically have whatever you want.
Done,
you know what I mean? Like, okay, that's not that interesting. But in the world of agentic, for service-based business, you usually have like scheduling, right? Yep. And other aspects that need to be dealt with, right? And so there's all of that stuff causes friction. I mean, it's necessary, right? Like you need to figure out what you're actually, like what time that you can actually book based on availability. It's a necessity, but whenever you're adding steps to a process, there's more potential friction in there. And so if your systems that are interacting with an LM can streamline that really, really well and can tell a great story about what types of services you do own, you have a huge opportunity there, in my opinion, to really grab like a ton of business from that standpoint. And just to be a little bit more concrete here, one of the fascinating things from a let's talk about like a fitness class. Okay, I want to go book a spin class Saturday sometime in the afternoon. We'll get back in this. Okay, if I know, like an LM may know in my local area, you're in my local area. That's a data point based on, again, like it can find that out if you have good machine readable content. Like, great, okay, I know this thing is close to Ryan. Awesome. Now he wants this time. Now what's going to wind up happening is the agent is going to look at a couple other things, right? It's going to say, okay, well, it might look at my schedule and say, okay, when am I available on Saturday? Then it's going to go check your systems and say, okay, do you have any of these times available, right? So if all of that stuff, if you can anticipate sort of that flow back and forth and make it extremely highly performant, then like it's a great experience, you know what I mean? And I think those are things that will really help, grab more business for you as a platform and as a business.
And one interesting thing we're seeing also is you can have agentic commerce on both sides, right? You can, as a consumer, you can use it as a tool to go book a spin class, to go buy something, to book a trip, but you can also use it as the merchant to assist. And so I think, as you think about workflows, think about field services. You're getting a fence built in your yard. Think about all the data that has to happen. There's availability, there's the local zoning regulations, you might need a permit, there's what type of fence it is, it's how big. You could use an LLM to pull satellite imagery and figure out how long is the fence, where are the breakpoints, where do the gates need to be, all of these different things. So, I think it'll be very interesting to see, especially a lot of the vertical SaaS companies in this room, how you're able to leverage the data sets you already have and bring that as a core differentiator. And that's, we talk about durability and resiliency, having those long data sets of decade worth of fence builds, for example, that you can then use to build predictive models, I think is really interesting. And so I think, we'll see, we talk, most conversations I think are still very much focused on the consumer use case of go buy me a widget, go
Yep.
buy me cookware, go buy me better, bed linen, something like that. These very complex, field services or B2B type transactions. I think we'll see how that evolves in the
Yeah,
next couple of years.
Josh, that's a great point. I do want to add on to that because I think it's such a great point. Is that it may seem overwhelming a little bit about like creating your own predictive models. Like what's really a huge win is even just giving it the context. Like if you give models context,
Yep.
general models, really good context, and we see this internally, like on our development teams, on how you can scale coding. Like, there's little magic there. Of course, you can fine tune things, but you can also just say, hey, if I leverage this data and provide it into the model, it does a really, really good job. You know what I mean? So, my push would be just to encourage you to start learning about how to leverage that. And another area that I do focus on is like the operational side for small businesses.
Yes.
This is so perfect. This is such a phenomenal area for just general AI, right? I mean, just think about, especially in the field work is a great example, right? Like how many times you have to respond to text coming in and like
Yep.
just facilitating, having like an Uber inbox,
Right.
type of thing. And like so much help can be done there. And your last point, I actually personally think the best opportunity for really scaling agentic commerce is the B2B. I think the B2B use cases is so great because you throw out a lot. It's a little bit simpler. You can start creating rules like, hey, when my inventory is low, go repurchase that. Great.
Yep.
Like like you can just kind of set it and forget it really easily. So I think it's a great opportunity that you called out.
All right, I want to move us. We've got about 10 minutes left before Q&A. I want to move to talk a little bit more about infrastructure, trust, fraud. As you well know, we've been using AI and machine learning for well over a decade now to detect and prevent fraud. In fact, historically, the models we've always trained is to find agentic type behavior, right? If you're expecting a consumer to transact, if you see a robot or a computer doing it, that oftentimes is a sign of fraud, especially high velocity attacks. And so a lot of the models out there around fraud prevention are trained to stop effectively agents. Although, 10 years ago, we didn't call them agents, we called them other things. And so how are you thinking about the shift that needs to happen? Because now there's human behavior that we still want to make sure gets through. There's good agentic behavior that we want to make sure gets through, but historically we wouldn't let. And there's also all the bad guys that are using really cheap LLMs now for fraud purposes. And so how should we think about this?
Yeah, it is. It's a great point. I mean, I've spent a lot of my time in the past trying to keep bots out, right? And now you're like, okay, well, like that's now different. Like fundamentally.
Now you want them in so they can buy stuff,
exactly, right? Exactly. So, and actually, I think this is where some of the protocols and infrastructure are really helping out a lot. And so, like, a big part of identifying, the first thing you need to do is sort of identify, like, like, is this a good or bad bot? And what I mean by that is that, and there's some great, like, Cloudflare is doing a great job in this space where the overall theme is, okay, you got to go register your bot. Okay, so now you have a little bit more of an identity that these bots have, right? And again, going back to like the way that like the early internet worked, effectively it's almost like registering for a cert back in the day of like, and this is how all secure transmissions happen, right? So you basically get to a point where you say, okay, well, is this, as traffic is coming in, do I know who this agent is or this bot, whatever, right? And that's one mechanism. Then when you get into the other protocols, what they're doing is actually creating very concrete and like cryptographically sealed ways to verify certain things are happening. Like it takes an identity from a human, matching it with intent, and then that stuff is added to the traffic coming in, for example.
Right.
And so, as somebody who needs to detect fraud, which we do all the time, what you're going to, as more and more adoption happens, you'll start looking and being able to inspect these payloads and say, does this information there? And it's all signed. You can actually verify it, which is great, right? So it's using techniques that are scaled. You know what I mean? And if they don't include that information, then we could say, oh, this is a higher risk of fraud. You know what I mean? And by the way, like for us, because we see two sides of the network, both consumers and merchants, we do this all the time anyway, so we can always fall back to something that's actually quite good today. So yeah, I mean, as these more and more adoption of the protocols, get adopted, I think it's going to add more and more security. So
Interesting viewpoint. Can we dive a little bit more into the authorization chain? So when an agent makes a purchase
yep.
on, let's say my behalf, who authorized it? Where does that authorization live? And then also, how are the card networks, how are the payment networks thinking about it from a liability perspective?
Yeah. Okay. So what happens sort of today, where we do have humans in a loop, because it does actually will scale for when you have autonomous, but it's setting the foundation for that world, right? So right now, if you're using ACP, which is OpenAI's protocol, and it's very similar to how AP2 does it and UCP does it on the Google side. But fundamentally, when you go to ChatGPT, I'll just walk through a scenario.
Okay.
I'm searching for, and in this case, again, I'll use just a product for, and I wind up going back and forth. I'm trying to find a beach ball or whatever it is.
Yep.
Okay, so it comes back and says, okay, we found what you want. Now, in today's world, what happens is that the user is present, and so you're like, okay, great, like buy me that beach ball. But what's actually happening for ACP transactions today, these are ones that are all within OpenAI to do end-to-end. What actually happens is a bunch of things behind the scene. And so what the agent or what OpenAI does is they say, okay, I'm going to take you, I know you, Ryan, because I've signed in through, almost everyone uses Google, I think, to sign in. We're going to use their identity to say, okay, this is you. And your intent was to actually buy this thing,
Okay.
right? Okay, great. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically seal that, and then I'm going to send that, because I know what merchant it is, it doesn't matter. But since I know the merchant, what I'm going to now do is take that payload, and I'm going to send it over to your processor, your payment processor. What your payment processor is going to do is it's going to come back with what's called like a scoped payment token, right? And again, the naming will change down the road, but fundamentally what that scope payment token does is it provides a lot of rich data around important things. For example, all right, well, if your beach ball all in with taxes and everything are $200, I like expensive beach balls, I don't know, then like that is criteria in that scoped payment token that will be in there. By the way, that particular merchant will be there. And the duration of how long that token lives will be in there as well. So all that comes into play when it gets passed back to the agent. The agent then will basically send that information back into the merchant, and then the merchant will then say, okay, thank you, I'm going to send it, like I'm going to process it like I process every other token, and then behind the scenes, the processor that supports that will verify all of that stuff and be on your way. Now, the reality is that today, people are in the loop, right? So it's kind of, the interaction is the same as there, but you can see that all of those layers and steps that are doing, you could easily scale out to autonomous use cases. For example, if I'm like, hey, I want to buy a beach ball, don't spend more than X, you know what I mean? And here's the general area that I want to spend it in. You can still do that intent with me. It just becomes a little bit wider, you know what I mean? But that will scale for those types of things, and that's kind of the interaction that's been designed into the system.
And have you seen kind of the underlying, underpinnings of the payment networks, be evolved to support this yet?
Oh,
Does
for sure.
Visa and MasterCard have, this concept of scope tokens? Are the acquirers out there? Are the issuer processors? Like, are all of them kind of ready for this, or is this still, a barrier that needs to be overcome
No,
before?
they're very much ready for it. I mean, they're defining a lot. We work with them a lot as well, right? And they've been great partners with us as well, because across all of that spectrum, there's a lot of different players that need to deal with, like, identity, for example, trust, right? And so in a world where you have these, like right now, they are open standards like UCP and AV, but effectively it's like one big company that's doing them, you know what I mean? And so what's nice about like the networks is that they are very heavily involved. They are spending a ton of time in there. We're, again, collaborating with them a lot, and they're very open to changes and as things go. Now, for one of the things, again, like just to identify how early on we are on this phase is right now, most people are really just dealing with like a credit card or a token, like for one card, right? There's no notion of like a wallet, right? And so we're starting to work with, but actually both companies in introducing a concept of a wallet where things get a lot more interesting and a lot more capable as a user, right? You know, so we're excited about that stuff. But yeah, I'm excited with where the infrastructure is going.
Yeah, lot more complexity.
Yes.
You know, between all the protocols, the wallets, the scoped tokens. As we kind of start to wrap up here, what is one or two concrete takeaways that vertical platforms in the audience can start thinking about as we move later into 2026 and 2027? They need to be thinking about their agentic commerce strategy. What should you be doing today?
I'll go back to some of the things that we talked about. I think get your business ready for to be discovered by agents, right? And again, actually, as of even like 2 days ago, like there's now a couple of companies I've seen popped up that just do AEO. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But tangibly, just getting a foot in the door with this is making a lot of your content that you have available, make it machine readable. And you can Google anywhere to find out how to actually do it. But that's sort of like a very low hanging fruit.
Okay.
The other thing I would say is I've sort of glossed over the concept of MCP. I would learn it. There are other mechanisms that you could do, but MCP is a very popular one. But the thing I want to focus on with MCP is that is going to be your front door. I would control your front door. And what that means is right now, a lot of MCP servers, there's like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands now, anyone can create an MCP server. So there's a lot of unsanctioned ones, okay? And what they're doing is they're basically connecting into openly available backends. Don't do that. Control sort of your front door immediately. And just even if you have like one tool available to begin with, like searching, do it. You know, you can host it on like Cloudflare or something like that. There's a number of ways to do it, but get your front door, own your front door, because what was going to happen is a lot of the people in the developer community search for these MCP servers, and they'll just grab the first one that they can find, right? So I would go own it, and then it's much better if it's like officially from you. And so I think those are good starting points from there. And reach out to me if you want some help on anything connecting with other LLMs. I love talking about this stuff, and I do take a very objective view. I'm happy to funnel you in any direction that makes sense for your business, but I do get excited about some of the stuff that we're building.
Yeah. We've got time for just a question or two. Anyone have a question for Ryan?
This is much easier than screaming.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
I have terrible hearing, so I would have just nodded my way through the answer.
You did a great job leaning in. So fundamentally, anyone can create like an MCP as a wrapper over anything, right? I guess that's what you mean by controlling your front door. Are there other aspects besides, say, being first or making it official or more public that can help, say, defend an MCP or make it more useful? As it relates to kind of integrating with partners?
Yeah, I think the key part is get the word out there that you do have an MCP server, and I would treat it like keep growing it. You know, don't just like put it out there and like leave it. Keep fostering that and actually look at the analytics. Like if you want to know like, hey, how is agentic commerce working? Like that's a great indication of how engaged are people. You know what I mean? So, you know, pushing this stuff through. Reddit is a good community to really kind of push that. You know, hey, we have an MCP server. Like, just FYI. There's other ones when you do build MCP servers, you can claim it, and it's like that. It's from official. It's officially yours and everything. Do all that work now and actually get involved in it if you're not already involved. It is, by the way, super easy to do. And you can scale it around easily. So I highly recommend doing it. The other one, if you want to take a step further, is like I was mentioning, a lot of these protocols are retail. I don't know what your business is, but like they are retail centric, which is fine. But there's like almost nothing on the servicing side of things. You know what I mean? And that's really ripe. And so what you'll see is all these protocols are all on GitHub. You can basically access it, and you can contribute to it. So if you really want to geek out, you can kind of help shape the direction of where that actually goes once you have your MCP server up.
Very good. Well, really sage advice, Ryan. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
Joshua.
you being with us today. Ryan will be here throughout the day, and so please find Ryan and engage with him. Again, thanks to PayPal for being our premier sponsor here at the event. We're going to take a quick coffee and networking break after this. We will start promptly at 3:30 for the next sections after the break. Thanks again, Ryan, for being with us. Big round of applause.
Yep.